Okay, this motion is Trump strikes against the Assad regime or bunk. And that is just a general motion against the strikes. So we're going to be, I guess, all aspects is fair game. And I'm going to be attacking both of his strikes recently and from last year. So basically, I have 8 reasons why I'm opposed to these strikes. One, they were illegal, both according to domestic law and international law. Two, they were done before any investigation was taking place. So I feel like we should kind of get the facts before we start blowing things up. Seems like common sense. Three, it was a big risk with Russia involved. Virtually, like every analyst agreed, there was a big risk attacking a country who's is a strong ally of a nuclear power. Uh, Four, this does not. This is a big one for me. This does not help the Syrian people because this is. I mean, this wasn't done in a vacuum. This is a civil war, and if you attack one side, you're going to help the other side. And in this case, on the other side of Assad is terrorists and jihadis, where the people don't want them taking over their country. Um, and the fifth reason is a gigantic waste of money. This strike cost at least $119 million. So we can assume the ones last year cost about the same amount, and we just don't get any return for that kind of money spent. Six, this is a big campaign promise that Trump made to stay out of Syria, and he broke that promise with these strikes, and that was a big contrast to his opponent. And I believe it was a big reason that he got elected. Seven, I mean, this is kind of the most obvious objection is, missiles tend to destroy things and kill people. So it's very destructive. And then lastly, we're at a very unique point in history to look at these strikes because this is the third time that this has happened. And the last two times we had different presidents and they approached the issue. Basically, they took opposite approaches. So we can just look back at recent history and say what worked better. And I think, it's objectively Obama's handling produced better results. It was legal. It was peaceful. It didn't waste hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money. He was able to disarm Assad. And we didn't see an attack for another 3 years, unlike Trump. Going in illegally, killing civilians and buildings, and then we're back in the same place a year later. So, yeah, 4 seconds. So,
okay, all right. I'm going to start with. I only have 2 main arguments instead of 8. So my 2 main arguments, I guess, the first one being the United States and any what I would classify as civilized country is morally and ethically obligated to respond to any chemical attacks or nuclear attacks by any person or country in the world, based just on standard human principles. Just any sort of humanism is going to make responding to such attacks, chemical attacks or nuclear attacks or any weapons of mass destruction is going to make us, we're morally obligated to do that. That's one of our American principles. So when we stand down and stand by and do nothing, we are actively being non-American and being non-civilized. I would go so far. Now, you talked about legally, and I'll come back here. I would argue that when it comes to chemical weapons attacks, specifically the United States and nearly every other country in the world is obligated by international law under the Chemical Weapons Concord or Convention. I'm sorry, the Chemical Weapons Convention to respond to and eliminate any chemical attacks or threats of chemical attacks on their people. This is a treaty that was signed and is currently signed by 190 or 165 countries that responds to chemical weapons and outlawing their use. And if they are used, we are obligated to respond and to eliminate that use. Whether or not we can talk about whether or not the bombing is an appropriate response, but action is definitely obligated. So I'm going to try in the next minute. Well, actually, I'm just going to pass it back, see if you want to expand on any of these in particular. I'm not going to try to rush through all 8 of them right now. So I'm going to pass it back to you.
I could expand on all of them, but let me just address your 2 points. So regarding morality, morality is kind of a sticky subject. If we had a way to measure morality, if we could have some common premise about how we base our morality, it'd be easier to debate. But for me, it's not moral blowing people up, killing people in response to people dying. I mean, this last attack, we were lucky that nobody died, but there was 4 reported injuries. But the last attack, I heard 2 different figures: 9 people died. I heard another 16 people. But with both of those reports, they both included 4 children dying. So, I mean, bombs kill people. So I don't know how that makes any sense to inject morality. It's not moral to kill people, especially innocent children. So, and that's what you're kind of basing the entire premise on, this evil to kill innocent children, like Assad allegedly did. And so we're responding in the same fashion with that. Risk of doing the same thing doesn't make any sense morally. Also, the legality, yeah, it is illegal to use chemical weapons. But until an investigation is done, we don't know who used those chemical weapons for sure. And to break a law I mean, it's kind of like vigilante justice. I mean, if the whole premise is to uphold the law, then it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, it's okay to break the law to uphold the law, because then you're undermining your entire basis for doing it in the first place. And just to further go into the legality of it, so the war powers are given to Congress under the Constitution. The AUMF is only for attacking terrorists like Al Qaeda, people connected to 9/11. The War Powers Act of 1973 has certain specifications that weren't met here. You got to be attacked, and it only gives you like 60 days to respond, but you have to be in danger for it to use that, and or a declaration of war or specific statutory authorization. And then regarding international law, the last UN Security Council resolution said you can only bomb Syria if you're targeting terrorists. And ironically, we're helping the terrorists by attacking Assad. But you can only attack a sovereign country if you have a UN resolution or if you're under imminent threat. Neither of those conditions were met. And I'm going to pass it back. 20 seconds.
All right, I'm going to respond briefly, then I'm going to start on your points here. When it comes to morality, I understand the argument that morality is sometimes too fuzzy of a subject in order to imply it here. But in this case, we have 165 signatories that agree that this specific act, the use of chemical weapons, is morally and ethically wrong and must be stopped. So to say that this is as universal a moral idea as we as a government and people of the world can come to agree on. So the majority of all the countries in the world agree that using chemical weapons is wrong and must be acted upon. So to say that we can't use morality, I mean, we have a defined and agreed upon moral obligation here. If this is done, it is wrong and must be stopped. Okay, so I'm going to move forward from that and just try to stop. You're talking about your first point here is that the bombing was illegal. The bombing was not illegal. The president does have power to act in the way that they did. It is not limited in the way that you're suggesting. It was not an illegal act. It was definitely proved. There was no war being waged. There was no war declared. This was just a particular response in response to chemical weapons. It was definitely not illegal. And you're saying before an investigation takes place. These bombings were not done before an investigation takes place. They were maybe not done before the specific type of investigation that you may have preferred to be. The United States has one of the largest, if not the largest, intelligence gathering organizations in the world. There was an investigation placed. They made a conclusion, and based on that conclusion, the president ordered twice bombings to take place. To say that an investigation didn't take place is simply wrong. To say that maybe you can argue that maybe a particular organization that you wanted to do the investigation didn't have time to do it, but that doesn't mean no investigation took place. So that point is moot, seems to me. Big risk with Russia involved. It seems like, given that what's happened, that it wasn't as big of a risk, especially considering that during the first attack, we had run the bombing that we were going to do through Russia. We made sure that they had their people out. Same with this attack. This was discussed. This was planned. There was no threat of intervention or going into war with Russia. That was already taken care of. And we know that that's true because we haven't gone to war, haven't had any further issues with Russia as a result of the first attack, and we haven't so far as a result of the second one. When you're saying does not help the Syrian people, I have to disagree with here. Syrian people were being bombed with chemical weapons. So to minimize that, taking action to minimize the use of chemical weapons is always going to be better for the Syrian people.
Yeah, they were attacked with chemical weapons, but until we know who actually did that, I feel like we could have a whole debate on the evidence surrounding what happened with the chemical attack. I definitely disagree. There was a legitimate investigation taking place. I mean, we attacked Assad a year ago, and then in February, Mattis, a year later, our own Secretary of Defense said we don't actually have evidence that Assad used sarin. And so, a year later, we don't have evidence of the last attack, and we're already jumping into another attack with no evidence. So, yeah, some governments made some claims. There wasn't a legitimate investigation done. I think you're talking about I guess you're referring to the War Powers Act when you said he has authority to act. Can you shake your head if you're talking about the War Powers Act? Okay, well, here, I'm gonna pass the mic so you can clarify.
Well, I mean, the president holds the power to have limited engagement. I mean, it's been used repeatedly throughout the world, over and over again by numerous presidents without a declaration of war. We haven't had a declaration of war since I think since Vietnam. But we have engaged in military conflicts. The president most certainly has the power to order these strikes, and it's not illegal. I'll pass it back to you.
Okay. Precedents here, yeah, every president has used that, but that's not really an argument for legality. You could say lots of people smoke weed and it's still legal. And I mean, it's even according to the own president. Of course, you've probably seen his tweets. I'm looking at him right now, so I know in one he says you have to have congressional approval, but I'm sure you've seen the tweets. I don't have to quote it directly. Yeah, here it is. The president must get congressional approval before attacking Syria. Big mistake if he does not. That's what Donald Trump said himself on August 30th, 2013. And lots of people in Congress have echoed the same thing, even though they're not going to do anything about it. But yeah, you have to actually have an actual law that gives you authority to do that. You can't just say, "Oh, it's been done, so it's legal." I'm gonna pass that back, so I forgot your other arguments.
Okay, just a couple things. I want to respond to what you said here. You're saying that there wasn't a legitimate investigation taking place. To me, it seems that the person that would require and who must decide whether or not an investigation is legitimate is the president of the United States, the person who orders the strike. So given that he has the access to the most information, the best information that the United States government has to offer, then he made those choices. To say that for you to come out and say that there wasn't a legitimate investigation taking place, at that time, obviously the president felt like there was, and he had significant reason, and move forward with the attacks in both cases. Now, you want to talk about the president's tweet says it was illegal. Now, remember, he made that tweet when he was not the president. Since then, he has then become the president and has become better informed about what the president office is allowed to do and how he is allowed to do it. So it doesn't strike me as odd that now that he's president, he uses the same power as every president before him since the Vietnam War, because he now understands what it means and what power is held in the presidency now that he has become president. So to say that President Trump didn't quite understand what was involved in the office back when he wasn't president. I mean, I most certainly agree with that. But now that he is president, he does know, and he's moved forward with these strikes. I want to quickly touch on these other last four here. He said huge cost of money. I mean, it wasn't expensive. It was expensive in order to bomb these strikes. I mean, it's dropping the bucket as to the amount of money we spend on military, but there's no price to pay that's too high to respond to a moral obligation and a legal obligation that we have in this case. In fact, it was quite cheap. We were able to simply use missiles. We're not able to risk them, or we didn't have to risk American lives. So it wasn't expensive in the way that normal conflict was. It was just money and some missiles. So I don't think that a huge cost. I think that point is moot here. If you want to go on to the big campaign promise, Trump has a track record of not keeping campaign promises, as do most presidents, because they've come to understand that when they're in the office, things that they thought they might do while they were making campaign promises become different than what actually needs to be done when they're presidents. So the president who makes a campaign promise, I'm not going to get involved in Syria, becomes president, realizes he has a different obligation, gets involved in Syria. That doesn't surprise me. That's what should happen. He has a moral and ethical and legal obligation to get involved in Syria. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back.
Okay, I remembered one of your past statements talking about morality and how we're universally, or I forget the language you use. Basically, we're all in agreement that chemical attacks are immoral. I think my case is more universal. It is universally accepted among everybody that killing innocent people is wrong, and that's what missile strikes often do. And the chemical attack stuff isn't actually a universal belief, because I mean, the U.S. used chemical weapons against their own people in the 90s under Clinton, killed 70 plus innocent men, women, children, and there was no international outrage. Of course, I'm talking about Waco, in case you're wondering. And so there was no international outrage. So it's not like a universal thing. It's just more kind of hypocrisy from America. So yeah, just killing innocent people, whether by any means, is more of a universal concept, and I think that is on my side. When you talk about the reasons Trump did this, I know it's really, when defending like military action or just really any actions of the government, it's really easy to bring up this evidence that they have or intelligence that we don't have. The fact of the matter is that they released a report on this, and the evidence they cited was the social media stuff, the videos that were going viral, stuff that everybody's already seen, and stuff that people have already dissected and kind of shown. Like I said, I don't really know if I want to get into the evidence of the gas attacks. I feel like that could be its own debate, but the evidence is out there, and it's been dissected, and there's a lot of counter evidence out there as well. There's plenty of counter evidence to at least second guess, blowing other sovereign countries up. They're in the middle of civil war and, have crazy radicals trying to take over the country. There's definitely enough doubt to make you pump the brakes on that. You mentioned money not being a drop in the bucket. Yeah, it is, but like I said, you keep talking about this moral obligation. Like, that's literally all you get from hundreds of millions of dollars is you get to pat yourself on the back and pretend that you did something noble, and that's literally it. That's not a good return on investment, is to feel, not even objective reality, done something good, just to feel like the way you talk about it kind of sounds like you just want to feel good about yourself, and that's kind of the sentiment I get from a lot of people. When you mentioned Trump not being, I only have 15 seconds, Trump saw and was talking about the same exact situation when he was criticizing Obama, so it doesn't really hold that now he has new obligations, because it was the same exact deal, and we had far better results from doing it a peaceful, legal way.
Okay, I'm not going to claim that I know that the details of the Waco siege. Now, it seems to me that if like sarin gas or some sort of chemical attack was used in Waco, and the world did not was not outraged by that, then the world let themselves and us down. This is how it goes in, and I want to touch on your last point here as well. To make the argument that what we did wasn't enough means that you must recognize that we should have done more, that our obligation to respond to these chemical attacks is even higher than what was done. I personally agree. I think that when the first chemical attack in Syria was done, the international government should have got together and removed all chemical weapons and chemical weapons facilities from the area. That should have been done. That wasn't done. And now we continue to have more chemical attacks so that we failed in our obligation there. But that doesn't mean we were not obligated. And even if we did something poorly, we were acting upon that obligation. So if you want to make the argument that we only did a little bit to make us feel better because it means that we're just show when we're meeting all our obligation, that's fine. But then you must admit that we had that obligation to begin with and that we didn't even go far enough to meet that. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that we didn't. We just made ourselves feel good, because even if doing the little that we did makes ourselves feel good, it admits that there was the obligation there, which means that Trump strikes against regime are not bunk. They are, in fact, maybe not as big as they should be, but they are not bunk. And so let me see, what was your other point here? I'm going to go past that back, and if you want to touch on your other points again.
I want to push back a little on your main premise. We have an obligation. Now, the only thing that gives us an obligation, like I said, we can go tit for tat with morality, and I think I have a better case there, just in killing people in general. The only thing that gives us an obligation to respond is international law. And as I pointed out, we broke international law in our response. So that doesn't hold up. That's the only thing that obligates us to respond. But like I said, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to weigh the pros and cons in the situation. I mean, just responding for the sake of responding isn't enough. And regarding the legality of it, it's not just like, oh, it's against the rules or whatever. When you do things legally, you have better results. It's not just a breaking rules. This is you get better outcomes that way. I'm just going to quote some arguments against the strike. So, a vital national security risk is clearly not at play. There is just too many unanswered questions about our long-term strategy in Syria. Another one says, I believe the president's proposal, military strike in Syria, cannot achieve its stated objectives. In fact, I fear it will make things worse. Another one is, I remain unconvinced that the use of force proposed here will work. The only thing that will prevent Assad from using chemical weapons in the future is the Syrian people to remove him from power. This strike, I do not believe furthers that goal. In fact, I believe U.S. military action of the type contemplated here might prove to be counterproductive. Another one, what is clear is that launching a few missiles will do nothing to end Syria's civil war, and is neither a real strategy to stop the deployment of chemical weapons in Syria, nor a guarantee that chemical weapons won't be used in the future by the Assad regime. That is not a plan for the region. That's why I continue to have strong reservations. Another one, no clear and present danger of the USA to justify going to war in Syria. Now, the reason I bring those up, those aren't talking about Trump's strike. Those are Republicans talking about Obama's strike. And ironically, those are all Republicans. I didn't read all of them. There's more there. But those were all Republicans that were opposed to Obama's airstrikes. And they were all supportive of Trump's airstrikes. And my point with that is they could be hypocrites. They could be politics. That's a big possibility. Or it could be that they actually had time to debate this on the floor. And then when you consider these things, when you have a real debate, you really think about things, you come to different conclusions instead of the president just moving unilaterally, and you just have to get behind him and support it. Like the costs and consequences of such an act needs to be debated, and when it is, you do things a lot better, like we did in 2013.
Okay, I'm going to try to work backwards here. When you're saying that there wasn't a debate done, or that Trump just moved willy-nilly and made a decision, now we need to remember that Trump didn't do this by himself. Trump did this. Our own government did an investigation. The UK government did an investigation. The French government did an investigation. They came together. They agreed that the appropriate response was to be taking out these chemical weapons facilities. This was a minor response. I think we know that if ideally it would have been more, but that was the best that they could do at the time, or the best that they could all agree upon. So and I think that speaks to your idea that it was illegal. I mean, when you have three governments coming together, I mean, obviously, if the governments are moving forward with the attack, it's not illegal. They understand that it's going to be justified. They check that to say that all these three governments are acting illegally against international law is just simply wrong. I assume, and maybe that's just me, but they know what's legal. They know what's not legal. They have teams that are experts on there. They know that these moves were legal. They've done them in the past. It's not illegal. So to say that the action itself is illegal is just, in my mind, just simply wrong. You push back a little bit on the idea of the morality of it, that you think that the idea that killing people in general is wrong or killing innocent people is wrong. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I mean, I personally disagree with you, but the international governments have come together and they have not banned the use of missiles. They have not banned the use of conflict at all. They have specifically banned the use of chemical weapons, and they have agreed to act to destroy those weapons and to act against players that use those weapons. That's something that they agreed upon. They are obligated to make that action against those that use chemical weapons. So for you to make the argument that, oh, the way that they do it, or that's a different question of morality, and maybe that we can talk about that, but that's not what's been agreed upon. The idea is to stop the use of chemical weapons, and that's what they're trying to do. This moves into the I just want to say, like, they're obligated because they've had the agreement, and you've said that in the things that it's not going to help end Syria's civil war. But the point of this attack was not to involve the international governments or the United States within Syria's civil war. That's not the purpose of the attack. The purpose of the attack is to simply respond to the use of chemical weapons. They're not trying to influence the civil war. They are responding to the use of chemical weapons. They are obligated to respond to the use of chemical weapons. The use of chemical weapons is illegal and should be responded to by everyone. So to say that by responding to the use of chemical weapons, it may prolong, that is not a primary concern.
Okay, when you say something is legal or illegal, you have to appeal to laws to make that case. You can't just say, "Oh, they're doing this, therefore it's legal." You have to appeal to laws. I mentioned several laws that don't give them authority. I name laws that they're breaking. I kind of got cut off, I think, when I was going to the law stuff. But you have to appeal these laws to why they're legal and what gives them the authority, and you haven't done that. As far as investigations, okay, so looking at social media videos is not an investigation. The governments did not do an investigation. They claimed to have evidence. They made some assertions. They did not do an investigation. That's why we have the OCPW, whatever, Conan to actually do an investigation. There are people that have done investigations. OAN went in on the ground, didn't find any evidence of chemical attacks. You have, I forgot their names. Another journalist went in on the ground, didn't find evidence. So people have investigated, and they've found contradictory, lack of evidence at the very least. The governments did not actually investigate. You can claim they have intelligence or something, but they're going off the videos of the people, hosing themselves off, and the bodies of the pictures of the dead people. That's not an investigation. Now, when you said the point is to stop chemical use, so Obama's actions. So when Congress denied Obama authority to go into Syria, when you take military options off the table, suddenly diplomacy happens. And we broke the deal with Russia to disarm Assad. So with Obama's actions, which you disapproved of for some reason, we didn't see a gas attack for 3 years after that, after we completely disarmed him. So the actions that you seem to have disapproved of actually achieved the goals you say these attacks were meant to achieve, but they didn't achieve, because a year later we're in the same boat. So we attacked militarily. It didn't change a dang thing, and then we see attacks a year later. Compare that to 2013, when we acted legally and peacefully and disarmed Assad completely without using any of taxpayers' money, and is by far a superior way to go about things. And so when you just look at these two examples in history, it should be plain which route we should take and which route produced better results. and that was Obama's route. That's it for now.
Okay, I just want to touch briefly on your idea that no investigation took place. I mean, I just simply disagree with the idea that an investigation didn't take place. I mean, we have three governments. Three of them, you have the United States, who we both agree has one of the largest intelligence gathering networks in the world. You have the UK and you have France. Both did independent research, both came to the same conclusion, and they moved forward. Now, you may, for some reason, say that they didn't have. I mean, I don't know where you get the idea that they did not do an investigation, or the investigation doesn't meet your particular standards. But your particular standards has nothing to do with whether or not it met whatever their standard is to move forward with the attack. It obviously did. They met the standards based on their investigation. If the investigation had been something different, they wouldn't have moved forward because they wouldn't have been able to justify it to the people who make the decision to move forward. So obviously, whatever information they got triggered their obligation to act. And you're talking about citing the laws. Okay, I'm here. I'm looking at the Chemical Weapons Convention. Okay, it is a treaty that was signed, and it was signed by all the members of the United Nations, as well as many others. Syria also signed the Chemical Weapons Convention. So by their own signature, they agree that the use of chemical weapons is going to be something that is going to have a negative response come out to them. Now, that leads me to your idea that I disapprove of what Obama did. Now, while I personally think that Obama's approach was too soft, and because it obviously didn't work. I mean, maybe it slowed him down so that there was definitely it took him a longer time to build up the weapons, I guess, or to get some more. I mean, whatever you want to say, obviously what Obama did didn't work, or we would not have had more chemical attacks in Syria, which we did, and chemical attacks by the Syrian government, which there were. So obviously his diplomatic action didn't work. So Trump is trying a different approach. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Trump does, but I do agree in the case here that Trump has an obligation to act upon the use of chemical weapons. And he is meeting that obligation. Maybe he's not doing it the way that you would like him to do, but he definitely has the obligation. He's definitely moving forward and meeting it. That's something. I mean, just to say that it would have been great if Obama's tactic had worked. We can both agree that it did not work, because chemical weapons are still being used in Syria and have been used in the years since Obama did that. So obviously that method doesn't work. So now there has to be another method. We have governments that agree on what that method is. Syria, as well as all the governments involved, signed the Chemical Weapons Convention. And so it's just clear cut to me.
Okay, I'm not disputing that using chemical weapons is against international law. I'm saying our response to it is against international law. That's my claim. And using your own logic towards the Obama's handling of the chemical attack, you said it didn't work because there was weapons used. Well, they're used 3 years later, so by your own reasoning, it worked 3 times as well as Trump's response to the attack. Because a year later, you're using chemical weapons. And you said that maybe it took longer for Assad to build up chemical weapons after he was disarmed. The great thing about these attacks is it doesn't even matter who did the gas attack. That's a valid maybe that's a valid explanation if Assad was actually responsible for these. If the rebels, which they've used chemical weapons as well, if the rebels actually did that attack in 2013, then it still makes sense because they didn't get the response they were looking for, because they want us to go in and take Assad out. They want us to get involved to help them. So they didn't get the response they wanted if the rebels did that attack. So they didn't do it for a long time. Now with Trump, they did get the response they wanted, and that's why they did it again right after he announced that he was going to pull out. They said, well, we got to do something. And then a week later, a chemical attack happens, just like a week after he said that we are focusing on ISIS instead of Assad. A week after that, there was suddenly a chemical attack. Now, again, I didn't want to get into this stuff, but it's just kind of strange at the timing of it. But either way, no matter who's a part of the attack, like by your own reasoning, Obama's was a more effective response. And even if, let's just say they both don't work, because by your reasoning, neither work, neither is Trump's. Those strikes you supported didn't work by your own reasoning. Even if you say neither of them work, nobody died under Obama's regime. People died. Innocent people died from Trump's response. So even if you take the stance that neither of them worked, you still have to say Obama handled this better, just because nobody died. And when you're talking about they did an investigation, by just saying that these governments do these actions and therefore they did an investigation, it doesn't follow, and it's just an appeal to authority. And the problem is the people that you're appealing to don't even agree with you. Like people in our own government, our own department, Secretary of Defense said that we don't have evidence that Assad used sarin gas. So even the people, I mean, it's fallacious already, but then the people you're appealing to admit they don't have evidence. So yeah, I'm going to switch back over.
Okay, just a couple things on that. If it was the fact that Assad had chemical weapons, and then during the Civil War, some of the rebel groups came in and took those weapons, and then there was the rebel groups that were using it. I mean, it's clear that the international community still has an obligation to go in and remove those chemical weapons by whoever's had it. So they would have to do to come to their assessment of who's using the chemical weapons and move to stop it. So you agree that no matter who has the chemical weapons, who's using them, the international community, which includes the United States, has an obligation to act. I feel like you agree with that. I mean, that's part of the convention. It's in there that they'll work together in order to stop to respond to the use of chemical weapons. So that's in the convention, that they're going to respond to the use of chemical weapons. So it's definitely legal, and whoever's doing it definitely needs, no matter who's doing it, the company to respond. You're saying that if the rebels themselves were trying to get the international community to remove Assad, but that would never be their point. That they would never move on Syria in order to remove the regime in the response to chemical weapons attack. That's not their goal. The international community simply moves in to eliminate the use of chemical weapons. That's what they do. That's what their stated purpose is, to respond to the chemical attacks, to remove the ability of the offending government to launch and deploy chemical weapons. That's simply what their stated reasoning is. So, and I get you, and I feel like, I mean, we're not going to disagree that people dying is not the best outcome. You know, definitely someone dying, but chemical attacks still happen. After, I mean, I'm looking at this list of the timeline of chemical weapons. There was multiple chemical attacks between 2014 to today. I mean, to say that chemical weapons attacks didn't happen in Syria since disarmament is just simply false. I mean, they've happened. Obviously the Obama's destruction, the diplomatic method of removing the chemical weapons didn't work. This is a different tactic. We both agree that it's not going far enough to eliminate the threat of chemical weapons that's used in that area. So, I mean, we're not going to disagree here. I think we just simply disagree on whether or not we have an obligation. But it seems to me that you understand that chemical weapons it's illegal to use them, and it seems that if you agree that the document makes them illegal to use, that same document gives us the obligation to.
I don't have much time, but okay, imagine you had to talk to the parents of these children we killed last year. To them say, why did my children have to die? Say, we had a legal obligation. That's just not good enough. History shows that the legal, peaceful way produces better results, and at any rate, doesn't kill people.
Okay. So in my final minute, I just want to touch back in. I think we're going to come down to the idea of whether or not the risk of losing life in response to chemical attacks makes it justifies us in responding militarily to chemical attacks. And I'd say that they do. The potential for the loss of life of innocents or anyone, and the way that people die while being exposed to chemical weapons has been, is agreed upon even by those in Syria, that this is a horrible thing, and to stop that is something that we're all obligated to do. someone can say, we were fighting against the use of chemical weapons against you when this child died. That's, it's sad that the child died, and I agree with you on that, but it is worth it